could you say a little bit about the compassionate inquiry process that you often suggest or work with people? Can you say a little bit about what that entails?
Yeah, so I was in family practice before I went to work in the downtown east side with addictions. I was in family practice, and for 7 years I was also the medical coordinator of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, looking after terminally ill people. And as a family physician, I had an advantage over the specialist colleagues. By the way, let's do a little test here. Well, I won't do it, it's okay. I knew people before they got sick. By the time I sent you to a neurologist with your numbness or your blindness, temporary blindness, or a gastroenterologist with your abdominal pain and your diarrhea, or a rheumatologist with your inflamed joint, we already know where the disease is. The rheumatologist only sees you as somebody who's already ill. But I knew people before they got sick. And I knew them in the context of their multi-generational families of origin. And I got a clear sense of who got sick and who didn't, and it wasn't accidental. And I distinguished 4 personality traits, and we talk about this in the myth of normal, of the disease-prone personality, and you already mentioned one of them. The first one is an automatic and compulsive concern for the emotional needs of others while ignoring your own. Number 1. Number 2, a rigid identification with duty, role, and responsibility rather than the needs of the self. The third one is this pathological niceness, where people are always so nice and so kind and so friendly to everybody. Why? Because they repress their healthy anger, which is essential for survival. Healthy anger, we have a circuit for it in our brain. It's important for survival. And the fourth one are 2 beliefs. One is that you're responsible for other people feel, and second, that you must never disappoint anybody. Now, these traits, I kept noticing them in people who got sick with rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, malignancy, colitis, Crohn's disease, chronic eczema, psoriasis, any chronic autoimmune disease, and very often malignancies. And the essence of it is the emotional disconnection from yourself. Now, at first I just thought I was seeing things. Well, I was, but they were true things. What I didn't know, that there's a vast body of literature, research, showing the relationship of these traits to chronic illness of all kinds, autoimmune disease, malignancy, and so on. So once I realized that, and not to mention, once I began to see the connection between childhood trauma and every mental health disorder you can possibly diagnose, from addiction to ADHD to everything else, I thought, well, it's not enough. It's fine. I need to give people or make people, avail people of the essential physiological medical treatments, but it's not enough. You got to talk to people.
Yeah.
But who's going to talk to them? My patients couldn't afford private psychologists, and psychiatrists don't understand any of this stuff. It's just not. It's not their fault. It's not part of their training. The average medical student, I want you to hear this and get it. The average medical student does not hear a single lecture on trauma. Not one. In 4 years of undergraduate training, not one. Most psychiatrists have a very shallow understanding of trauma based on their training. So, where am I going to send these people? I have to start talking to them myself. So this is how I stumbled into counseling people. And I began to find out that by asking the right questions, the answers are inside people themselves. So then I began to do counseling and get more and more adept at it. Then I began to do this in groups, and people kept asking me to teach to them what I was doing, and I said, I can't teach it to you because I don't know what I'm doing. But they say, yeah, you can teach it. And finally, they talked me into giving a weekend workshop in Toronto for psychotherapists on this method, so-called. And I was really hoping, honest to God, I was fervently praying that nobody would sign up. Because I was desperate not to expose my utter incompetence in front of, sure enough, 300 people signed up, and we did it, and it was successful. So then this course evolved from that. I didn't create the course, by the way. That was created from my work. If it was waiting for me to create it, it would still not exist. But it's really based on the essential idea. Well, have you had A.H. Almaas here?
No.
Oh, well, that's somebody you should have. Do you know about Almaas?
Yeah.
Okay, well, now he's
Okay.
par excellence.
It's not the diamond approach, is it?
The diamond work, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And Almaas says, only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to see the truth.
Wow.
So that's the compassion part. The inquiry part is rooted in my conviction, which is not personal to me, that the truth is inside all of us, that our bodies, as Bessel van der Kolk says, do keeps the score, and that with the right questions in a compassionate setting, people will come to the truth of themselves. So that's what this whole idea is based on.
Yeah. And how much of it is around identity do you work? That somebody sees them, how much of it is around identity?
Yeah.
So if somebody sees themselves, I'm strong, I'm successful, I'm powerful, I'm this particular identity, and I have to be that identity in the world. And the body does not want to go with that because it means you have to suppress another part in order to be the one part. Is that something that you see playing out, and how do you work with that?
Yeah, well, again, I think it was from Eckhart that I learned this, that identity or identification comes from the Latin idem, the same, and facere, to make. So when you identify with something, you make yourself the same as.
Okay.
So if I identify as a doctor, then my status in the world, my self-respect, my value, how I want to be seen, is dependent on that particular role. But who am I really underneath all that? So identification is always, it contains an element of falsehood in it. Even if you identify with something true in yourself, if you make yourself the same as that one particular thing, you're diminishing yourself.
Right.
You're diminishing yourself. And that identification is how we develop the personality. So that the personality is an amalgam really of some genuine traits, but also with certain dynamics that we identify with because we're afraid not to be them.
Right.
So somebody who's very strong will never have the courage, or somebody who identifies with being strong will never have the courage to say help. Because to say help would be to undermine the self-image, or I can handle everything. And believe me, it's hard for me even to fathom this anymore, but in my 40s, I consciously believed that everybody else could be stressed, but I couldn't. That was my belief. Well, what does that lead you to? A very challenging life.
Yeah.
You know, so these identifications which form the shell of the personality are limiting us.
Right.